You know, I was just sitting here thinking, wow, I haven't died yet. That's amazing. With how carelessly I was moving. And then Rathalos was like, you know, that's a good point.
Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. And now, we have brought back the Wheel of Jobs. This time with separate wheels for each role, so that we can continue to pick roles based on queue times. One non-guild has duty per job in a role. You'll have to check the full stream to see all the spins though, as it gets way too hectic for me to keep track of here. We also had some decent variety in duties this time around. That said, for duty 1, we're stealing names from Gobos as dancer. Possibly the most busted job for guild tests thanks to standard finish. For duty 2, we went to Ifrit Extreme. We started with an overview of the mechanics, specifically heavily focusing on searing winds. But for the first pull, we had a large amount of avoidable damage from the healers not being as careful as they should be with positioning with the debuff. What wiped us was CF dying to searing winds from LA, followed by a sequence of 5 nails exploding back to back for 5 vuln stacks. If it wasn't for the dead healer, it might have worked out fine. For the second attempt, we put down some markers, and CF was very consistent about sticking to a marker when they had the debuff, but LA would go to their marker and then, I guess, forget that they still had the debuff and slowly gravitate towards Mettle, leading to a lot of unnecessary damage. Even better is that they would argue that they weren't doing that while caught red-handed. Oh boy. This time, we sort of wiped due to a mix of things. Damage from searing, a tank dying to AoEs, and the other tank having trouble as a result. Healers probably being overwhelmed by the overall damage. Whether the searing winds were the actual problem is hard to pinpoint, but it certainly didn't help. On the third attempt, we make it all the way to the third set of nails with no deaths, and then the Black Mage and a Summoner dies as the first nail is popped. The Black Mage stood too close to the searing wind, and the Summoner wasn't super healthy, and had a stretched out chain increasing damage taken. Then, LA gravitated towards Mettle, shoving me with their searing winds, and simultaneously sat at full MP, not really healing anyone until a few nails exploding in sequence killed me, the Black Mage, and the Summoner again. Yes, them being far away due to searing winds makes it difficult, but if your co-healer's completely dry and you're full, either they're overspending and the healing wasn't needed, or there is a possibility that you're not doing anything. At least at this level. We somehow managed to stay alive, with the Gunbreaker eventually going down. But we make it through the nails, and then LA decides to heal LB1? I mean, I guess it might heal a bit for everyone. How about Malikah 2? But miraculously, despite the chaos, we make it through. Based on what I saw, I suspect CF was healing very inefficiently, while LA was not healing as much as they should. And then this on top of a chaotic searing wind, and it is Ifrit, made things very hard. For duty 3, we went to Ultima Weapon Extreme as Paladin, and at first it might seem like the party knows what to do, but when we take a closer look, Shaq from my Savage team is the Sage here. For the first set of orbs, it looks like he took an orb with incidental help from nearby players, while I took the other. For the second set of orbs, I grabbed 2, while Shaq pumped himself up to survive, taking a third. And for the third set of orbs, I grabbed 2 orbs, Shaq dies, taking a third, and then I take both of the orbs in the remaining corner as they were too close to each other already. And that was that! Successful Extreme, with 2 players doing the actual mechanics. For duty 4, we went to Hell's Lit as Dragoon, and this run went very well as you might expect. However, I made a bunch of mistakes myself. At a few points, I broke combo, or just didn't finish combos correctly near the start. There were also points where I held cooldowns for longer than maybe made sense. Still, things went alright, and I was more focused on the conversation we had on stream. The topic was players being scared of not being good enough in content in general, such as alliance raids, normal raids, or even just dungeons. My advice here is that as long as you are trying your best and respond politely, the probability someone is actually gonna get on your case over this is unlikely. The important part is to be honest with yourself. If you claim you're trying your best, but you haven't moved at all in regards to improvement for a while, then maybe you are not actually trying as hard as you maybe could. Or alternatively, you're already a master, but if you have worries like this, you probably are not. try your best. If someone gets on your case over it, just let them know you're trying your best. If they give you advice, but you have difficulty implementing it in the moment, try and write it down or take a screenshot, and then deal with it after. And if they bring it up again, just let them know you will look into it later. Usually, I would say this should be enough. But aside from that, and I will say it a third time, as long as you try your best, that's good enough for most content. It's a game, it's a hobby, it mostly shouldn't be stressful, but you don't have to completely slack off either, right? For duty 5, we went to Castrum Meridianum as Summoner, and yeah, classic MSQ roulette, not that much happens. Remember, especially at these levels, Summoner gains a surprising amount of damage from remembering to weave in some auto attacks. No, seriously, it actually does. It's worth something in the ballpark of 10% extra damage in this duty. For duty 6, we went to Rathalos Extreme as Dark Knight, and the Red Mage knew me. Hello! And this was definitely an interesting run. We had a moment where 3 players were stunned at once in phase 1, and then a moment later, both the healer and the Red Mage went down in a single hit. In most cases, such a disastrous start means we're not clearing this pull. But we make it into phase 2. Starting it off, it seems like the healer is very new to the fight and might not have done their homework. Our Red Mage miraculously survives getting hit and tanking through poison damage that the healer could have removed. The healer seems to eventually realize that the stack is taken alone, but still results in fire straight through the middle of the arena. Afterwards, the healer's hit from across the arena and barely survives once again. Just to be super clear, HP is super valuable in this part of the fight, and since the only way to heal is with the potion, taking chip damage from a dot not being removed when it easily could have been, could mean that you drop low enough that you have to heal to survive if the stack goes on you, or need to be full just in case Rathalos hits you. So if you're a healer, or even a bard, on this fight, I highly recommend that you make heavy use of your ability to remove debuffs as much as possible. After Rathalos gets up again, he gets really focused on the samurai, who nicely dodges and survives until the next down, leading to a victory. For duty 7, we're back on Ultima Weapon Extreme as Gunbreaker, and we actually had a DPS leave the duty on site. Wow! And then we get a community replacement. Early on, I request my co-tank to put on their tank stance because, considering they were a sprout, I didn't believe they knew there was a tank switch. I need them to have enough enmity that I can just shirk off to them. I also managed my enmity such that they could catch up. For the first set of orbs, our Reaper dies helping. For the second set, I take 2 orbs while the rest takes care of the third. For the final set of orbs, I grab 2 as usual and run towards the usual suspect corner while the team took out a third set. And we see this incredible scene of the Reaper running through between the 2 orbs, like it's some sort of goal line. Thankfully, I barely managed to grab the orbs anyway, and we got the clear. For duty 8, we went to Ghost Park as Warrior, and aside from the Scholar forgetting to dodge the initial hats on Leonog, nearly the whole dungeon went perfectly fine with not really anything worth mentioning. A tip for Leonog though, is that you should probably hold attacks that lock your character, or are gap closers, when Leonog calls in the Hug Brigade, so you don't accidentally lock yourself into being grabbed. That is also why I held Primal Rend for a moment during the fight. The only other noteworthy mistake throughout the whole dungeon was right at the end of the final boss where the Scholar forgot to switch for Ghost Duster and died, but it was so late in the fight that it was already over. For duty 9, we went to Leviathan as Warrior. We refilled the wheel and Warrior was lucky. On the first try, I mess up due to being used to the Extreme version, where Leviathan usually dashes across the arena first, but if he's doing a different mechanic first, he doesn't, so I waited for the tell, which meant I used the converter too late and we wiped. On the run back, the barrier was put up as Leviathan left the arena, which turned out to be not too early. Nice. And yeah, big shock, the rest of the fight is just kill Leviathan, so easy peasy. For duty 10, we went to Tender Valley as Black Mage. Our healer is a first timer, and this did come up a couple times. The first boss has a mechanic with a knockback from the center, while the arena is filled with cacti that will explode. The cacti with flowers on them explode wider, so you need to get knocked to a corner with a cactus without that to be safe. Considering all this is shown at once, it is tough to decode the whole thing before it's too late, and our healer goes down. I try to go over to Phoenix Down, but stag in melee takes priority, so we do that first, and make it through the fight just fine. On the final boss, the healer's confused by the labyrinth. Thankfully, I find the correct path so quickly that I can make it back to the center and show them the correct spot in time. For duty 11, we went to 5 floaty boys as Viper. A quick 1-minute adventure, although awkward to not have the speed buff on AoE combos. For duty 12, we went to Bardam's Mettle as Paladin. Overall, the duty went fine, but I was very much justified in splitting up the pulls at the start of the run. The Sprout Scholar was making heavy use of Physic. In fact, I feel like they hardly attacked at all on AoE pulls. The Black Mage's AoE rotation was also weird. I'm not 100% sure on the Monk, but we did have a thing at the start where a mob with no HP survived for several seconds until I hit it, because seemingly it turned invisible to the entire team the moment I started running. That aside, on the final boss, our Scholar got tricked by the gaze, but we somehow also managed to skip the whole ad-intermission part of the fight. Now that is weird. For duty 13, we went to Malikah's Well as an 8-minute replacement Gunbreaker. Overall, the duty goes pretty normally. As it turns out, the tank I replaced just disconnected, and that was that. But on the final boss, we ran into a bit of trouble. On the first wave of Heretic's Fork, the White Mage goes down due to completely misinterpreting the mechanic and getting comboed down. Thankfully, I have Phoenix down. And party mitigation, which might have been exactly enough to keep the party alive. And then the second Great White takes down the Machinist. Then, for the wave of Breaking Wheel, something weird happened. The best way I could describe it is that the White Mage understood how to do the individual donut AoE mechanic, step into it, but each time it somehow snuck up on them that there was another one. So they would come to the circle, cast, and then start casting something as the next circle started, be late and get hit, and then repeat the problem until they died again. Thankfully, the Samurai had Phoenix down, and then we thankfully make it to the end. For duty 14, we went straight into the Poison Cloud as Viper, and I say that quite literally, as the Paladin didn't seem to particularly care to avoid the Poison Clouds initially, until I guess they realized it hurt a lot. We still made it through quite fast. For duty 15, we went to Alexandria as Dark Knight. Overall, our damage was a bit on the lower side. Just a bit, such that we saw, for example, one more mechanic than usual on the final boss. No big deal. Here's a tip for optimizing your damage as Dark Knight for free. If you have any jobs in your party with a raid buff, in a casual duty where players tend to not align their raid buffs well, holding MP without sitting at full and allowing yourself to hold one Shadowbringer charge allows you to spend these resources when you benefit from damage bonuses. So, for example, by holding these resources, you might be able to use Edge of Shadow twice alongside Shadowbringer when the Dancer uses Technical Finish, which does add up to like 1500 potency put inside the buff that wouldn't have caught it otherwise. Just a random tip, since holding cooldown sort of comes at a potential loss. This, when done specifically this way, doesn't. For duty 16, we went to Ifrit Extreme as a Viper 15-minute replacement, and a moment later, Ilana comes in as a Sage replacement. We briefly check in on the team, what they know, what they don't know. The White Mage seems concerned, but aware of the Searing Winds mechanic, and so we give it a go. As usual, we make it to the last set of nails before any deaths, and then the Black Mage goes down. Due to some unfortunate circumstances with Ifrit, our Paladin ends up getting flambéed to death. And as we clean out nails, we run into the awkward revelation that our White Mage has gradually inched away from their marker to let people get to the nails, which meant they were now stuck in a cluster of all the remaining nails, which culminates in them taking a risk, dashing at us just as the Searing Wind pops, dealing a lot of damage to us. But fixing the issue somehow without anyone dying. Although this gambit did bring our Dragoon as low as 32 HP. All you need is the last point anyway, but we make it through just like that. Very well done, team. For duty 17, we went to Lost City of Amdapor as Sage, one of the weirder dungeons. Remember, the way you get the second boss to come down and fight you is to kill one of the moth creatures and standing still in front of it as it spews you with a debuff. This debuff makes you take slightly more damage, and stacks, but the boss will only target players with this debuff and will straight up leave the arena again if no one has it. Which means that getting a second stack before the first one runs out might be neat, but stacking them too high might pose a problem. On the final boss, we had a bit of teamwork, so we actually managed to open the doors on time to dodge the Ruinous Omen. For duty 18, we went to self-management as Bard. Unfortunately, no Warden's Paean, so not much I can do aside from lean away. Weirdly, the tank decided to intercept the full menagerie of mobs instead of focusing the boss, which almost led to their death before we could finish up. For duty 19, we went to Sunken Temple of Qarn as White Mage. This went about as you'd expect, but here's a few tips for the first and last boss. The first boss uses a mechanic called Mortal Ray. The boss is stunnable, and doing so can completely nullify this mechanic, as it will be unable to actually apply Doom to you, saving time. The final boss is also stunnable, and it regularly casts the spell Summon, and stunning that can remove like most of the ad waves of the fight before the boss becomes immune to stuns due to the building resistance, again saving time. I'm mostly pointing these out because our tank didn't seem to know. Also, did you know that Astrologian can solo Sunken Temple of Qarn synced? And finally for duty 20, we went to Clyteum as Bard. This run went excellently, so let's talk a bit about Bard, a bit about boss 1, and a bit about boss 3. For Bard, a tip that might seem obvious, but would be worth mentioning just the same, is that as you cannot start a song while not in combat, paying attention to when a fight is going to end, and sometimes starting a song a bit earlier than maybe you would prefer to keep the songs going, can help with alleviating song alignment in the long run. As long as you average 40 seconds per song, give or take, you're fine. And that also means that if the fight is going to end, replacing Wanderer's Minuet, the arguably strongest song, early is still worth it to keep it going and aligned. Next, the first boss has this mechanic called Motion Scanner. For some reason, this mechanic is extremely prone to being cheesed. I'm still figuring out exactly what it takes, but if you back away from the boss to the point where the scanner can fully pass the boss hitbox, and then use a gap closer, such that you dash completely through the scanner, then it will count as done correctly and not punish you. Now, I'm not sure if this works just as well with regular dashes as opposed to gap closers that snap you to the boss, but this could be a way to skip the mechanic entirely. Besides, I believe the punishment for failing is damage and a knock-up that effectively wastes the same amount of time you would have spent standing still in the scanner anyway. On the final boss, both the mechanic called Puppet Pairs, just firing off all the puppets at once, and Puppet Mastery, repositioning them and then firing, consistently makes a much wider safe area in the area between the two bigger puppets. As in, find the angle at which the puppets are closer to each other around the arena and stand on that side. This of course comes as a result of their cones taking up area on the other side that they're actually facing. But still, watch out for circle AoEs. We went extra long for a set, only to have generally longer duties. What incredible comedy! But we still got a whole 20 duties in, and we now also passed 27 34ths on the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before level 85, where certain healer actions get boosted, the strongest single heal over time effect accessible to normal combat jobs is Gunbreaker's Aurora, adding up to a combined 1,800. Before Dawntrail buffed it, it was only 1,200.